Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1848. The Habsburg Empire stood like a colossus across Central Europe, its shadow falling over a dozen nations, 100 languages, and millions of souls. Within the gilded cage of Schönbrunn Palace, Emperor Yves Queller observed his domain with eyes that missed nothing and revealed less. At 32, he had ruled for a decade with the quiet, determined efficiency that characterized the Habsburg line. His dark hair, already showing streaks of silver at the temples, framed a face more handsome than his official portraits suggested. The artists always painted him sterner than he was, mistaking his thoughtfulness for severity. The revolution had come like a summer storm, swift, violent, and cleansing. The streets of Vienna had filled with protesters demanding constitutions, rights, and freedoms. Metternich, that old spider of European politics, had fled in March. By autumn, imperial troops had reclaimed the capital, but something fundamental had changed in the empire. Yves knew this as he stood by the window of his private study, watching the gardeners below restore order to beds trampled during the fighting. It was there he first saw her, moving purposefully across the newly replanted gardens. Winifred Darlington, daughter of the British ambassador, had arrived in Vienna just as the revolution ebbed. Her father, Lord Darlington, had been dispatched to help restore diplomatic relations in the wake of the turmoil. At 23, she moved with a confidence unusual for women of her station. Her chestnut hair was arranged simply, without the elaborate curls favored at court, and she carried a leather portfolio that suggested purpose rather than leisure. Yves watched as she stopped to sketch a damaged statue, her pencil moving quickly across the page. There was something in her concentration, the tilt of her head, the way she seemed oblivious to the grandeur around her, focusing instead on the wounds inflicted by the revolution. He found himself lingering at the window long after he should have returned to the pile of dispatches on his desk. "Your Majesty?" His private secretary, Count Liebermann, cleared his throat. "The Hungarian delegation awaits." With reluctance, Yves turned from the window. "Yes, of course. Show them in." That night, unable to sleep, he returned to his study and found her portfolio forgotten on a garden bench. He dispatched a guard to retrieve it before the evening dew could damage its contents. Alone, he opened it, telling himself it was merely to confirm its owner. Inside, he found not just sketches of Schönbrunn, but of Vienna itself, not the imperial city of grand boulevards and opera houses, but the Vienna of narrow streets where revolutionaries had built barricades. She had captured faces, ordinary people with extraordinary expressions of hope, fear, determination. The last drawing showed his own palace, but from a perspective he had never considered, seen from below, as a common subject might view it, both beautiful and forbidding. "Return this to Lady Darlington tomorrow," he told his valet, closing the portfolio carefully. With the compliments of the palace staff. He did not sign his name. It would be inappropriate for an emperor to notice such a small thing as a forgotten sketchbook. But he found himself at the window again the next day, watching as a footman delivered the portfolio. Even from a distance, he could see her smile of relief, the quick glance around the garden as if searching for her benefactor. For 3 years, Yves observed Winifred from afar. Court protocol provided occasional glimpses, diplomatic receptions where she stood quietly beside her father, state balls where she danced gracefully but without flirtation. Unlike many young women at court, she did not seem intent on securing a titled husband. Instead, she continued her solitary walks, her sketching, her quiet observations of a world recovering from revolution. Gradually, Yves found ways to learn more. Casual questions to Lord Darlington about his daughter's interests, comments to his staff about ensuring the ambassador's family had access to the imperial collections. He arranged for certain books to be added to the palace library, volumes on botany and natural history that he had overheard her discussing with the imperial gardener. "Your Majesty shows an unusual interest in the sciences," remarked his chancellor, Baron Metternich's replacement. "An emperor must be knowledgeable in all things," Yves replied, without elaboration. In the spring of 1851, as Vienna continued its recovery and the empire stabilized under a new constitution, Yves faced increasing pressure to marry. His advisors presented lists of suitable princesses from across Europe, German duchesses, Spanish infantas, even a Russian Grand Duchess. The empire needs an empress, Your Majesty, Count Liebermann reminded him gently. And heirs. Yves nodded, scanning the list without interest. That evening, as was his custom, he walked alone through the private imperial gardens. Only here, away from courtiers and ministers, could he feel something close to freedom. As he rounded a hedge of carefully trimmed boxwood, he came upon Winifred seated on a stone bench, sketching the last rays of sunset illuminating the palace windows. She stood immediately, dropping into a deep curtsy. Your Imperial Majesty, forgive my intrusion. I had permission from the head gardener to, please, he said, lifting a hand. Continue your work. I did not mean to disturb you. Instead of returning to her sketch, she studied him with those observant eyes. If I may be so bold, Your Majesty, you look as though you needed the solace of these gardens as much as I did. The directness surprised him. Court etiquette dictated that one did not comment on an emperor's mood, much less suggest he needed solace. Yet there was no impertinence in her manner, only a simple human recognition. These revolutions have been difficult years, he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. She nodded. My father says you've handled them with more wisdom than most monarchs would have shown. Your father is generous. He gestured to her portfolio. May I? She handed him her current sketch, the palace gilded by sunset, but with particular attention to the shadows gathering in its corners. It was beautiful but honest, showing both the glory and the weight of the Habsburg legacy. You see things as they are, he said quietly, not merely as convention dictates they should be seen. Is that a compliment or a criticism, Your Majesty? A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. From an emperor? Always both. He returned her smile, a rare gesture that transformed his usually solemn face. That chance meeting became the first of many. Emperor Yves began to time his evening walks to coincide with Winifred's sketching sessions. Their conversations, initially cautious and bounded by protocol, gradually deepened. He spoke of the weight of ruling an empire in revolutionary times. She shared observations about Vienna that only an outsider could make. He found in her something he had never experienced in his isolated life, someone who saw him as a man, not merely a crown. Why do you never attend the court balls? He asked her one evening as autumn painted the gardens in gold and crimson. I find them rather artificial, Your Majesty, she admitted. Everyone speaking words polished to such brightness that they reflect nothing real. He laughed. And here I thought it was because you disliked dancing. Oh no, I love dancing. Just not while wearing diplomatic armor. Their friendship remained proper, always in settings that could not invite scandal. Garden paths visible from the palace windows, the imperial library during public hours, art exhibitions where the emperor's presence was expected. Yet Yves felt himself changing, softening in ways that surprised his ministers. Your Majesty has been most receptive to the petition from the Hungarian provinces, one courtier remarked with surprise. Yves had simply nodded, not explaining that Winifred had shown him sketches of Hungarian families displaced by the fighting, helping him see beyond political abstractions to human realities. By 1852, as Europe settled into an uneasy peace, the pressure for the emperor to marry had become impossible to ignore. The Council of Ministers presented their final list of candidates, with the German Princess Sophia of Saxe-Weimar marked as their preferred choice. She was 18, beautiful, properly educated, and came with advantageous political connections. We have arranged for the princess to visit Vienna this summer, Count Liebermann informed him. The announcement could be made by autumn, with a spring wedding to follow. Yves received this news in his study, looking out over the garden where Winifred was sketching a group of children playing, the offspring of palace staff, who had grown accustomed to her presence and no longer stood on ceremony around her. I will consider it, he said finally, dismissing his ministers. That evening, he did not appear in the garden. Instead, he closeted himself with state papers, trying to convince himself that he must do his duty to the empire. Sophia would make a suitable empress. The fact that he felt nothing for her was irrelevant. Monarchs did not marry for love. A week passed. Yves avoided the gardens, burying himself in affairs of state. He agreed to meet Princess Sophia when she arrived, to give her fair consideration. But each night, alone in his chambers, he found himself returning to Winifred's sketches, which he had secretly collected over the years. Gifts given on appropriate occasions. purchased through intermediaries from exhibitions, or commissioned directly for the imperial collection. On the 10th day of his self-imposed exile, Lord Darlington requested a private audience. Such a request from the British ambassador could not be denied, though Yves suspected its purpose with a mixture of dread and resignation. "Your Imperial Majesty," Lord Darlington began, once they were alone in the Emperor's study. "I come on a matter of some delicacy. Your posting to Vienna is ending," Yves said flatly, having heard rumors of diplomatic reassignments. "Yes, Your Majesty. I am to return to London next month to take up a position in the Foreign Office." The older man hesitated. "My daughter will accompany me, of course." Yves felt a hollowness spread through his chest. "Of course," he managed. "Lady Winifred has been a credit to your embassy. Her artistic contributions to our cultural life will be missed." Lord Darlington studied him carefully. "Forgive my presumption, Your Majesty, but I believe her absence will be felt most keenly by yourself." The Emperor stiffened. "I don't take your meaning, Lord Darlington." "With respect, sir, I believe you do." The ambassador's voice remained gentle. "I have observed Your Majesty's interest in my daughter for some time. As her father, I would be remiss not to acknowledge it before we depart." Yves turned to the window, unable to maintain his imperial mask. "Your observations are correct," he admitted quietly. "But you need not concern yourself. I am well aware of the impossibilities." "Are they truly impossible, Your Majesty?" Lord Darlington asked. "Times are changing. Even emperors may find more freedom than in generations past." "An emperor's freedom is an illusion, my lord. We serve the empire, not ourselves." Yves turned back to face the ambassador. "I wish your daughter every happiness in London. She deserves a life filled with the honesty and beauty she brings to everything she touches." Lord Darlington bowed deeply. "As you wish, Your Majesty. We depart in 3 weeks' time." Those 3 weeks passed like a fever dream for Yves. He performed his imperial duties with mechanical precision while inside. A battle raged between duty and desire. He avoided the gardens entirely, unable to trust himself if he encountered Winifred alone. Princess Sophia arrived with her entourage. She was indeed beautiful, well-mannered, and properly deferential. During their carefully chaperoned meetings, she said all the right things and showed appropriate interest in the Habsburg traditions. The court buzzed with approval. The ministers were satisfied. Everything was proceeding as it should. The night before the Darlingtons were to leave Vienna, a diplomatic reception was held in Lord Darlington's honor. Protocol demanded the Emperor's presence. For hours, Yves maintained his composure, speaking with dignitaries, acknowledging Lord Darlington's service. Only once did his gaze meet Winifred's across the crowded room. The sadness in her eyes mirrored his own. As the reception wound down, Yves retreated to a small antechamber for a moment's respite. He had not expected to find Winifred there, standing before a painting of his grandfather, Emperor Franz. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she said, curtsying. "I was just saying goodbye to Vienna through its art. There is nothing to forgive." He closed the door partially, allowing them privacy while remaining visible to anyone passing. Propriety maintained even in heartbreak. "I understand you leave tomorrow." "Yes. The morning train to Paris, then the Channel crossing." She attempted a smile. "Back to English rain and London fog. You will be missed." The words were inadequate, formal, nothing like what he wished to say. "Will I?" Her directness, the quality that had first drawn him to her, had not abandoned her even now. "You have avoided me these past weeks." It seemed wiser. He moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the painting rather than each other. "Princess Sophia has arrived." "Yes, I saw her. She is lovely." Winifred's voice was steady. "She will make a beautiful empress." That is the general consensus. A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Winifred turned to face him. "May I give Your Majesty a parting gift?" She withdrew a small package from her evening bag, a remembrance of Vienna. He accepted it, their fingers brushing momentarily. "I have nothing prepared for you. You have given me quite enough, Your Majesty. More than you know." Alone in his chambers that night, Yves unwrapped her gift. It was a small sketchbook, filled not with Vienna's landscapes or the palace gardens, but with moments, him listening intently to a petitioner, laughing with children during a public ceremony, deep in thought in the library, standing alone at a window. Each drawing captured something essential about him. not as emperor, but as a man. On the final page, she had written simply, "What I saw when others saw only a crown." Yves did not sleep. As dawn broke over Vienna, he made a decision that would alter the course of not just his life, but potentially the empire itself. He summoned Count Liebermann before breakfast. "Cancel today's appointments," he ordered, "and arrange for my private carriage at 9 o'clock. But Your Majesty, Princess Sophia, will have to wait." "This cannot." At precisely 9, the imperial carriage, unmarked save for the driver's uniform, arrived at the railway station. The emperor, dressed more simply than was his custom, entered the diplomatic waiting room where the Darlingtons were preparing for departure. Lord Darlington's eyes widened in surprise. "Your Imperial Majesty, this is unexpected." Yves barely acknowledged him, his gaze fixed on Winifred, who stood frozen by the window. "Lady Winifred, might I have a word?" "In private." Lord Darlington, understanding immediately, bowed and withdrew to the platform, ensuring they remained visible through the glass doors, but out of earshot. "Your Majesty," Winifred began, her composure faltering. "We are about to depart." "I know." Yves took a deep breath. "For 3 years, I have watched you, learned from you, changed because of you. I have been emperor since I was 22 years old, and in all that time, no one has shown me the world as you have, honestly, clearly, with compassion for all its flaws." Her eyes widened. "Sir, please, let me finish before my courage fails." He stepped closer. "The world expects me to marry Princess Sophia. The court has already planned it. The ministers have approved it. It would be the sensible, traditional choice." "Yes," she whispered, "it would. But I find I cannot do it." He took her hands in his, protocol abandoned. "These revolutions that have swept Europe, they fought for freedom, for the right of people to determine their own destiny. Should an emperor have less right than his subjects?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Winifred Darlington. Not for political advantage or dynastic concerns, but simply because you have shown me how to see the world and myself more clearly. And if you can possibly return that feeling, I would be honored to make you my empress." The bustling station seemed to fall silent around them, time suspended in the space between his words and her answer. "People will object," she said softly. "A British commoner, not even minor nobility. The court will be scandalized. Let them be. The empire has survived revolution. It can survive a love match." He smiled. "And you are hardly common, whatever your title." She searched his face. "And Princess Sophia? Will find a match better suited to her youth and temperament. I have already composed a letter expressing my profound regrets." "You've thought of everything." "I've had 3 years to think, Winifred. 3 years of watching you, learning from you, falling in love with your mind and heart." He paused. "I only realized too late that I might lose you." The train whistle sounded, a warning. 10 minutes until departure. "This is very sudden," she said, though her hands remained in his. "For you, perhaps. For me, it has been the slowest, most careful realization of my life." He released her hands and stepped back. "I will not pressure you. If you wish to return to England, I will understand. But know that my offer stands, and my heart with it." Lord Darlington reappeared at the door. "The train, Winnie. We must board." Winifred looked from her father to the emperor. "I need time to think, Your Majesty." Yves nodded, the imperial mask slipping back into place despite the turmoil within. "Of course. Safe travels, Lady Darlington." He watched as she boarded the train with her father, his heart like lead in his chest. The whistle blew again. Porters slammed doors. Steam billowed from the engine. As the train began to move, Yves turned to leave, unwilling to watch it carry her away. He had taken only a few steps when he heard his name, not his title, but his name, called out behind him. "Yves." He turned to see Winifred standing on the platform, her traveling bag at her feet. Through the window of the moving train, Lord Darlington gave a small, knowing smile and a wave of blessing. "I've had 3 years too," she said breathlessly as he reached her. 3 years of sketching an emperor and finding the man beneath. I don't need time to know my own heart." 6 months later, to the astonishment of European society and the cautious approval of the Austrian people, Emperor Yves Queller married Winifred Darlington in St. Stephen's Cathedral. The Habsburg court adapted to their unconventional empress with surprising speed, won over by her genuine interest in the empire's diverse peoples and her thoughtful contributions to cultural initiatives. Their wedding portrait, unlike the stiff formal paintings of previous imperial couples, showed them surrounded by books and art, the empress holding not the traditional flowers but her sketchbook. In the background, visible through a window, was the garden bench where they had first truly spoken. Years later, when their children asked how they had met, the emperor would smile at his empress and say simply, "I watched her from afar, until I found the courage to be seen in return." Their love story became a quiet legend in Vienna. How an emperor who had weathered revolution found his greatest strength in the eyes of a woman who taught him to see beyond the crown. And in the imperial collections, preserved with care, remained the sketches of an empire in transition, and of the man and woman who had changed with it, finding in each other the courage to choose love over tradition and honesty over power.